One of the advantages of using Firebase Auth for authentication in your mobile application or your web application is that you can have multiple sign-in providers where users already have accounts, so they don't have to create and, more importantly, remember a username and password specifically for your application. So in this video, I'm going to show how to add Google Sign-In to a Firebase application. I have a previous video where I set up Firebase Auth within our application. If you haven't watched that yet, I encourage you to watch that first because I'm going to be building on top of that in this video. In this video, I'm just going to show how to add Google Authentication to an existing Firebase Auth profile. And it's actually quite straightforward. So let's take a look. I start by navigating to the Firebase console, and then I choose Authentication on the left, and then Sign In method, and we see in the previous instance I created a simple email and password. Now I'll select Add New Provider and Google. One note here, we're going to need to create an SHA-1 fingerprint, which I'll show you how to do in debug mode in just a moment. For the moment though, let's choose Enable. Note that we need to provide it with a project support email. I select my email address and choose Save. Now, we need to download our latest configuration file because that's going to have our OAuth configuration. First, we're going to need to configure our SHA-1 certificate, and then we can download that file. To add SHA-1, I click on the little gear up here, and I choose Project Settings. And down towards the bottom, we see SHA Certificate Fingerprint, Add Fingerprint, and this is where we're going to put our fingerprint. So let's generate it. Good news is we can have multiple SHA-1 fingerprints associated with our application. And that will work well for us because we're going to need one for debug mode and then another one for actually running this in production. In this video, I'm going to focus on the one that will generate for debug mode. In production, we would typically generate a signed bundle or APK, and then it walks us through a series of steps here where we can generate an SHA-1 fingerprint. Now, it requires a few extra things like a key store path, a key store password, so on and so forth. And that's beyond the scope of this video. I'll cover that in a separate video a little bit later. But just so you know, when you're creating the final build to put on the Play Store, that's where you can get the production SHA-1 fingerprint. Let's look at debug now because that's where we are right now. We're developing this application. One thing I really like about putting my videos on YouTube is the knowledge of the community is bigger than the knowledge of the individual, or as I like to say, knowledge is like open source software. It improves when it's used and when it's shared. I have a previous version of this same video where I actually work through the command line in using key tool to generate an SHA-1 fingerprint on the command line. And one of the viewers of the video said, one small addition, SHA-1 key can be found using Gradle, project title, tasks, Android sign-in report. So yeah, you're right. There is an easier way to do it. So thank you, PentexNYX, I think is this user's name. Thanks for the suggestion because I looked it up and you're right. But I do want to show a couple caveats of doing it that way because I had to change a couple things to get it to work. So what we're talking about is Gradle over here. And what you should see is your application name here. You may or may not see tasks here. Initially, I did not see tasks. So a couple things I had to do. First of all, Gradle settings under experimental. This do not build Gradle task list during Gradle sync was ticked, and I had to untick that. I thought that would give me that tasks view, but it didn't. So one more thing I had to do is right-click and choose Tasks Activation. And that kicked off a Gradle build that sure enough gave me this Tasks view. Now under Tasks, I can go to Android and I can double-click Signing Report. And down in the console window here, it's going to generate an SHA-1 fingerprint for me. So I can scroll up, kind of went fast there. Sure enough, here's my SHA-1. I'll copy, go back to my console and paste. And notice it recognizes it as an SHA-1, and now I choose Save. I need to grab this Google Services JSON file because remember, it added that OAuth section to the file. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Download. I'll change this view on the left to Project View because that's a little easier to see. We see the old Google Services JSON here in the app directory. So I'm simply going to grab the new Google Services JSON and drop it into that same app directory. Choose Refactor. And it will likely ask me to replace. Yes, I want to overwrite. Just out of curiosity, if we take a look at this Google Services JSON, I can show you what has changed. I was curious, so I put it in a diff tool, and I thought you might be curious as well. If you take a look, here's our OAuth client, and that's what was added for our authorization. Now, change to code is fairly straightforward. I go to my activity where I'm doing the login, and I'm already building an array of providers. So you can see here on line 268, 269, I have my providers, and I started with just a simple email provider. Let's add the Google provider as well. So I'll put it's already set up to be an array list because you see it's creating an array list of. At the moment, it only has one item in it. Anytime I want to add a new provider, Google, Facebook, GitHub, Microsoft, Yahoo, Twitter, whatever my sign-in provider is, I just need to add the builder here. And, no surprise, this one's simply called Google Builder. I redeploy the application. Let's see what happens when I choose Log On. Now, previously, it took me directly to a screen where I could enter my email address. Notice at this time it gives us a choice. Sign in with email or sign in with Google. So all of the providers that we want to support will appear here, and since I've now added a new one, it gives me the option to sign in with Google. I'll select this. I will tell you, if you sign in with your default Google account, it will think this is your phone, and then it will start emailing you and, asking you to confirm it's your phone and stuff like that. I typically do use an email authentication, but nonetheless, this does give us a nice option and a nice demonstration to see how to log in with other providers. Put in my username and password. And now, incidentally, I can't really show you this, but on my actual physical phone, it's asking me if I'm signing in, which is nice. It gives me a bit of two-factor authentication there, rather. I'm going to go ahead and choose skip on this, just so it doesn't think this is an actual phone, and then I will agree to the terms. I don't really need to back up anything on this emulator to Google Drive, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And after a few moments, take a look at where we've landed. We are back in our application. Breakpoint set here where we're going to collect our Firebase user information. I'll step over this relatively quickly. So we can confirm here that we have a legitimate user with a new user ID. And by new user ID, I mean it's something different than I had before when I was simply logging in with email. Let's take a look. So we can see on authentication, we have two unique records, one for each of my sign-ins, and those are legitimately unique because I didn't share any detail across these two accounts. I generated them with two separate email accounts. There's no way to know that those two are me, really. If we take a look at our database, we look at users. Right now we have a dummy user I set up initially, and then the user I set up previously when I did email authentication. And as soon as we finish debugging this part, we'll see that it will create a new user record for us with my Google Authentication. And sure enough, there we have it. A new identifier, and under this I can have a new collection of documents that I want to save. So in this video, we've seen how to add Google Sign-In as a provider to Firebase Authentication. We've also seen how to generate our SHA-1 for our Debug key store. And we've seen how to apply that and generate a new Google Services JSON file and implement that in our project. As always, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments, especially if you found a better way to do things than I did, which, again, helped with this video. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.